welcome. It's another Confessions podcast. Thank you for downloading another audio array of terrible tales from the Sinful Radio 2 listener. They all need some forgiveness from the Caring Collective. Let's see what happens. This week we bring you an ambiguous Arctic aurora, a sickly scenic story in the province of Siena. I think that works. A befuddled Birmingham-bound Brownie Pack, and a red rodent reenactment. It'll all make sense in a few seconds. BBC Radio 2 with another Drive Time Confession. And it's sort of seasonal, but it's also got a reference to Father Christmas in it. All will become clear as we bring you tonight's tale from Jim. Dear Father Simon, this is a holiday rep confession, not a Club 1830 confession, but one of a respectable ski season vintage, if there is such a thing. I could probably do a series on holiday rep confessions, having battled and survived 11 seasons, some lakes and mountains, some ski, but this particular one, a beauty, I think, from my very first ski season, takes place in January 2004 in Levi, which, as you all know, is in Lapland. I was wet behind the ears, eager to please and unjaded by the endless demands and, frankly, ridiculousness displayed by my fellow countryfolk as soon as they set foot on foreign soil. Levi is a bit different as a ski resort. An all-rounder with huskies, reindeers, ice hotels, skidoos, Father Christmas and the Northern Lights. The bane of my life and my fellow reps' lives. The constant questioning and the constant disappointment when we couldn't forecast exactly what time and what night the Northern Lights would actually show themselves in all their fabulous beauty. Luckily, I hear this season, I'm told it was an excellent year for the Aurora Borealis, so they showed themselves plenty. However, unluckily for this particular set of guests, for a whole week there was no sign of the Northern Lights, and I was beginning to feel the pressure because obviously us reps can control the cosmic rays, solar winds and magnetospheric plasma that's needed.
Well done.
I don't even know what magnetospheric plasma is, but obviously it's involved in the Aurora Borealis. In December and January, because of the proximity to Father Christmas's actual home, which, as you know, is in Rovaniemi, a 2-hour coach ride away, we take 3 coaches in convoy 3 times a week to this sugar-coated Arctic wilderness. That's right, 3 coaches 3 times a week for 2 months. Much shandy was consumed afterwards in the local bar to counteract this surreal universe of non-stop Christmas for 2 months. Imagine that. It was on a 3rd return journey for me one particular week, and I was guiding a coach back to the resort. Snow Dogs on the DVD player for the 100th time. All the guests were snoozing due to the aforementioned shandy, and my mobile started to buzz. It was my friend and colleague on the coach at the head of the convoy. She was excited. Look out of the window. It's the Northern Lights. It's amazing. A really unusual display of colour this time. Wake your guests up and we'll stop off. Let them look and take pictures. They're going to absolutely love it, and us. Now, ordinarily, Father Simon, I'm not one for stopping an excursion, especially on its return. We were 5 minutes away from the resort and I wanted to get back and sleep. But these guests had not seen the Northern Lights all week, and I duly, over the microphone, woke everybody up, stopped the coach, much to my driver's dismay, because coach drivers endure along with us reps. He wanted to get home as well. Cameras were found, oohs and ahs were exchanged, and officially, I was the best rep ever. So, when we reached the resort and the guests were disembarking, congratulating me and my rep friends for waking them up and saying how marvellous we were, and it had made their holiday. Oh, a tip, thanks very much indeed. My friend, who had made the initial phone call, slunk up to me, and in a stage whisper, making sure the coast was clear and no guests were around, said, "Floodlights." Pardon? The ski slopes are floodlit. Because Lapland, as you know, is sunless until the middle of February. Completely dumb to what she was driving at, I looked at her blankly. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, "the Northern Lights, it was floodlights. They were floodlights." And then the penny dropped, or ojikili, as they say in Lapland. "What?" I said, all my coach party have taken photographs of floodlights on snow." "Yes, but they'll never know. They'll go home happy." "Should we hand back our tips?" Well, what do you think? Well, anyway, so Father Simon, I really need forgiveness, not from the guests on the bus, who doubtless have been showing everyone they know their own... Come and see my photographs of the Aurora Borealis. Actually, it's just a few lights in the snow. Ignorance is bliss, and frankly, they're normally such experts on everything when they're abroad. I'm staggered that they were fooled. Anyway, I do ask forgiveness from the coach drivers that we made stop, who put up with not only the guests, but us reps and our endless misinformation, demands and silliness. And that's from Jim. Now, I'm not... I have never travelled to Lapland, and I've never seen Aurora Borealis, and I would like to very much. But I would have thought, depending on the amount of shandy that had been consumed, you wouldn't be fooled by floodlights on snow. Anyway, this coachload of 3 coachloads were convinced that some floodlights on the ski resort was the Aurora Borealis.
But they've never seen them before, have they? So why would they know the difference?
Well, it's fancy, it's in the air,
One's
it's
in the
multicoloured, it's greens and blues, and they're swirly.
That's true. I have to say, I wouldn't know the difference. If someone told me it was a northern light, I would have gone, yeah, amazing, let's take a picture. I think that it wasn't Jim's fault, because it was the friend. I mean, if Jim had done this, that would have been one thing, but it was Jim's friend, and Jim didn't even know that it wasn't a northern light.
They took
Actually,
tips.
Jim should have known the difference between northern lights and
well, he didn't.
And
it was his first time, so...
Yeah, well, there you go. I think none of the guests knew any different, and they were very happy because they, as far as they knew, they'd seen the northern lights. They went away happy. Nobody would have gone back and said, oh, by the way, I told you those were northern lights. Actually, they weren't. Here, my tip. So, no, I think he did what any right-thinking person would do, and I'm going to forgive.
There are a whole group of people, obviously, who have the worst photographs of the Aurora Borealis of all time, and that's because it isn't the Aurora Borealis. What do you say, Bobby from the Priory?
It's so lovely. I'm a bit with Rebecca on this. Although I don't usually like deception, I think the truth is really important. What they did is they made sure those people ticked every single box. They saw Father Christmas, and they saw the Northern Lights. They are the same mysteries. They have taken their families out. Well, they have,
What?
They've taken them. They've seen both, haven't they?
Okay. Have you been on the shandy?
No. What I'm saying is that trip wanted to see Father Christmas. They went to see Father Christmas. They wanted to see the Northern Lights. So just the simple case that they were actually the Northern Lights. In context,
very close to the edge.
Yeah. In context, it doesn't matter, does it? Everyone was happy.
Here comes
Forgiven.
Mike. What are you making of this, Mike?
Well, I have seen the Northern Lights. I took my girlfriend out to Iceland, so it wasn't Lapland, it was in Iceland a few years ago.
Well, you say it was the Northern Lights.
Well, but I remember feeling really underwhelmed by them. They were just a sort of...
It was probably just
spotlights.
just a lamp.
Well,
Sky with a torch.
We were perhaps like Jim. Yeah, our guide assured us that they were the Northern Lights, but it was just a dull green glow in the sky.
That's
so
a lava lamp.
Yeah, perhaps. I perhaps would have preferred seeing some ski lift floodlights in the sky. So I completely forgive Jim on this one.
The Knight's Tale takes us back to San Gimignano. This is Algie's going to... Do you remember it was San Gimignano where we had all the pigeons?
Yep.
Going absolutely crazy just a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, having heard that, Algie sends this. Father Simon, Brother Mike and sisters Rebecca and Bobby, listening to your San Gimignano confession the other week brought back a strong sense of remorse for a sin of my own. By the way, I should say now that there's a degree of unwellness about this. There's a little degree of...
What's going to make us feel unwell?
Well, I'm just saying there's a bit of vomit at some stage. Okay. That's all. Some 12 years ago, me, my wife Beth, and our 3 daughters, who were 9, 7 and 5 at the time, were staying at a beautiful campsite set in the Tuscan hills not far from Florence and Siena, and just a little further south of the lovely medieval town of San Gimignano. There you go, San Gimignano. It was one of those sites that ran kids' clubs for a few hours most mornings, meaning the girls could make friends and learn new activities while Beth and I cleaned, shopped, or mostly lay in the sun reading in peace. The couriers who ran the kids' club were students looking for a little sunshine and a few euros for their summer holidays. They seemed to be mainly Dutch and advised on the best places to eat in Florence, when to catch the Pelio horse race in Siena, and where to shop for provisions. On the Wednesday of our first week, I made the trip from the poolside to collect the girls for lunch. I was a few minutes early, and I ended up having a conversation with one of the couriers, Jacob, about our planned excursion the next day. I say the girls won't be here tomorrow because we're off to San Gimignano, because we've heard good things about it. Oh, you'll love it, says Jacob. It's stunning. How are you getting there? We're going to go through the mountains, taking a bit of the scenery, I say. Absolutely not, says Jacob. He adopted his firmest courier voice at this point. You do not want to do that. It's very, very twisty. Your girls will be ill. Use the autostrada. Use the motorway route. I said, but the guide, never mind, trust me, I know, says Jacob. You don't want to go into the mountains. He then proceeded to give me detailed instructions on where to pick up the motorway. I gave a brief nod, the kind of nod that you give when you have no intention of taking any notice. The girls had finished their activity, were collecting their water bottles and joined me. Thanks, I say. Anyway, I spent a lot of that afternoon and evening looking at the map, the directions I'd printed out before leaving home. It's all about planning, you know, Father Simon, and consulting my guide to Tuscany. What I managed not to do was to discuss the options with Beth or the girls. They knew nothing of the conversation with Jacob. Following morning, we set off, taking the mountain route. Here's the thing, as Matt would say. If he was here, we were on holiday, exploring the area, taking it all in, getting a feel for the reach, not just jumping in the car, putting a foot to the floor and speeding from one destination to the other. And I had confidence in my girls. I believed in them. They never got car sick. Never, ever. We headed out of the camp on another glorious morning, and Beth read the directions. They were very clear. We found the route without difficulty. It wasn't too bad. Took us up gradually on roads which curved gently around the wondrous countryside. Life is good sometimes, and you have to trust your own judgment. Beth picked up a right turn, and I figured out we were only 20 kilometres from our destination. But now the road began to turn a little, and then a little bit more, right and left, and right and left, and left and right. The twist became relentless as we slalomed our way up the mountainside, and the lane became narrower. And then came a cry from the back. It's daughter number 1. I feel sick. You'll be fine, you'll be fine. I think it straightens out in a minute. I was guessing. It didn't. Kilometre after kilometre of turns. 5 minutes later, the unmistakable sound of a child vomiting. And it's not daughter number 1, it's daughter number 2. You'll have to pull in, says Beth. Well, I could see that, but where was I going to pull in? This was a road devoid of lay-bys. Before I found a parking spot, I heard the sound of daughter number 3 joining in the sick club. Over the next memorable 2 kilometres, the odours of unpleasantness, I've cleaned this up, managed to spread throughout the hire car until all of us were feeling a little bit nauseous. Eventually we reached a summit of sorts and a gravelly area to pull into. Beth, in that miraculous way that mothers can, produced wipes, kitchen roll, deodorant, even clean tops from her bag, and the girls were made fit to carry on. The car, less so, though I did my best work to get things shipshape. I checked the map. I'm nearly there, I think. Nobody agreed, but we had to carry on. After all, who wanted a return trip down that road? 10 minutes later, we pulled into San Gimignano, taking in the fresh air, buying gifts. I made sure everyone had lots of money to spend. We even ate a sure sign that everyone was feeling better. As we headed back to the car, I explained to Beth that I'd spent a lot of time working out an alternative route, away from the hills. I think we should try the autostrada, I say. Maybe the motorway, much straighter, far less hairy. And that is what we did. That is the way that we went. I even thought about confessing then to all what Jacob had advised the day before. But why spoil the rest of the holiday? I took the girls to Kids Club for the rest of the week and collected them. Best for Beth to avoid any unwanted conversation with Jacob, don't you think? But I now need to seek forgiveness from Beth and our girls for the obvious, from Jacob for doubting him, and for whichever employee of the car hire company had the job of cleaning the car after its return. I did my best. Mitigation, although I acknowledge that this was a sin which sprang from male pride, it was also through a misplaced determination that we should see the best of Tuscany, because it really was a very picturesque route. Algae, male pride is what it is. Ignored the top advice, ended up with a car full of vomiting children. Always a summer speciality. What do you think, Sister
It
Rebecca?
may have been a picturesque route, but I doubt they saw any of it because of all the vomiting going on. I have to say, I feel really sick listening to that. And I don't know about people listening at home or in the car, but in fact, if you're in the car listening, you probably feel even worse. So
Auto-suggestion.
That's good, isn't it? Auto-suggestion, that's exactly the word I was looking for. I really do feel very nauseous. Anyway, I think, it was ridiculous that he ignored some very sensible advice from Jacob. I mean, what is the point of getting advice from the locals if you're not going to listen to it? All I can say is the silver lining. I mean, they say that nothing handles like a rental car. I'm sure that nothing is vomited into like a rental car because you don't have to clear it up. So that is the silver lining in this whole story. But aside from that, I'm not forgiving.
Let's see what Bobby from the Priory makes of it all.
Well, the thing is he did take them on this beautiful, beautiful route that they wouldn't have seen normally. Who wants to sit on a motorway, even if it's for 10 minutes, and miss those mountains?
Well, I'd rather do that than be sick.
Well, I think, it's difficult. I think it was worth the risk because you say auto-suggestion. If you'd have told them, look, shall we try the route, but you may be sick, then they definitely would have been sick. At least I think to try it is worth it. I definitely think so. I hope they were not fabric seats in that car, but I think I forgive you because let's face it, you found an alternative route back. You didn't do it to them twice. You are forgiven.
What do you think, Mike? Mike?
Well, I mean, usually am very forgiving here, but I'm afraid I can't forgive on this occasion. You can't ignore the local advice. Heed Jacob's local knowledge. And just listening to that, the smell, it's making me retch. I mean, the smell.
wipes.
Yeah.
Okay,
And the
all
people
right,
who had the
very
car afterwards. Oh, no, sorry, can't forgive.
Okay. Gather round, it's another Drive Time Confession here. Tonight's sent in by Brown Owl. Thank you, Brown Owl. You might imagine that it's going to involve a brownie pack, and you'd be exactly right. Dear Father Mayo and the Absolution Angels, as I prepare to hand over my brownie pack to my daughter... Is that how it works? Can you just pass it on? Like a monarchy?
I don't know, but what about the uniform wouldn't work, would it? Size-wise.
Anyway, she's probably got her own. As I prepared to hand over my brownie pack to my daughter, I felt it was time to confess to a sin that happened about 20 years ago. I know that lying to your own children is generally forgiven on your programme, which is true. However, will you forgive me lying to other people's children? My friend and I had gone through brownies, guides and young leaders together. On turning 18, we completed our full leader training. We enthusiastically appealed to the local commissioner to allow us to run our own brownie unit. She was less enthusiastic about this prospect. However, with the retirement of an older leader and no one else to take over, she reluctantly agreed that we could run the unit. At the end of what we felt was a successful first year, we decided to arrange a day trip to celebrate. A new centre had been built in Birmingham, which housed various forms of aquatic life. I think the word we're looking for here is aquarium. As it was still fairly new, significant discounts were being offered to take groups such as ours. Even more discounts were available if you went by train. Well, how could we refuse? On the morning of the trip, we all met at the station. My friend and I were quite surprised that many of the girls had never been to Birmingham. We were even more surprised by the number of girls who had never been on a train before, all except one. We'll call her Amelia. Now, Amelia went to private school and came to Brownies to get to know local girls. She spent the whole journey regaling anyone who would listen about her frequent visits by train to see her aunt and cousins in London. She'd seen all the sights, that kind of thing. Well, after 30 or 40 minutes, we approached Birmingham New Street Station. Now, for those of you not familiar with said station, it's approached by a long tunnel and the platforms are underneath a large shopping complex. This prompted Amelia to break off from one of her many amusing anecdotes mid-sentence and shout, for some reason, "Well, we're in London. They've taken us to London. We're not in Birmingham at all." Well, the other girls were a little unsure about this, but seeing the bank of escalators that led up to the shopping centre and a double-decker bus as we walked down the ramp into the city centre, she convinced many of the other girls that she was absolutely right. I'd have thought Birmingham New Street Station sign would have convinced some. Anyway, let's assume that Amelia has managed to hoodwink all the other brownies. We made several attempts to reassure the girls that they were in fact in Birmingham, but Amelia's experience seemed to count for far more in their eyes, and they remained convinced that they were actually in London, even though we were the leaders and in uniform. What's this all about? Says Brown Owl. Well, the final straw came when we reached the canal side, near to the Aquatic Life Centre that we were about to visit. This, of course, according to the girls, was the River Thames. "No, it's not," my friend said, and I protested. "You're lying," says Amelia immediately. "It's the River Thames. I recognise it." You could go off these kids, really. Anyway, there then started moans of, "Well, we don't want to see the fish. We want to see Buckingham Palace. We want to see the Queen. But we're in Birmingham. No, we're in London." Anyway, this went on for a while. At this point, Father Simon, my friend and I simultaneously noticed the CCTV camera that had been placed almost directly above where we were standing. "No," I said. "You can't see the Queen, but she can see you." "What do you mean?" asked the girls. I pointed to the CCTV camera. "Do you know what that is?" I asked. "It's a camera," piped up one of the bright sparks. "That's right," I said. "And all the CCTV cameras in the whole country go direct to Buckingham Palace." And so my other friend chips in now. "And if you're naughty, the Queen will see what you've been doing. She will send the soldiers that guard Buckingham Palace to come and find you. They will put you back on a train, a special prison train with no seats or toilets or windows, and you'll be banned from coming to London ever again." At this point, the girls looked a bit scared and smartened themselves up and walked without further protest to see the fish. We didn't get much of them. We didn't get much out of them that day. Dear Collective, could I have your forgiveness, please, from the girls themselves for allowing them to think that they visited London when they didn't, for letting them believe for many years, in some cases, that the Queen studied all CCTV cameras in the UK, from the very confused parents who got girls telling them that they'd been to London when they'd only signed a permission form for the girls to go to Birmingham, although none of them actually asked us about that. Anyway, and finally, obviously, from Her Majesty herself for using her name in the deception. I hope you can forgive me. Well, we have sort of lying to kids is, as everyone knows, a recurrent theme, and often I think we've had Father Christmas involved as they're just behind the smoke alarm. The smoke alarm turns out to be like a Father Christmas detector anyway. But apparently in this case it's the Queen behind the CCTV, Sister Rebecca looking stern and a little worried.
Well, no, Amelia sounds like a bit of a strange girl, doesn't she? So do you think she actually knew that they were in Birmingham, but she was trying to make everyone believe they were in London?
I don't know. I would have banned her from my particular brownie pack.
Yeah,
actually,
definitely. And it is a bit odd that nobody noticed the signs. I mean, presumably it said Birmingham Aquarium as well, where they were, apart from.
But if Amelia says it's London, then it's London.
So I think it was a bit of a gullible lot there, and the only way to deal with them was obviously to
ban them.
No, well, to fabricate another story about the Queen watching them. That was clearly the only thing that they understood. So I'm not going to blame Brownell for doing that. And they obviously did try to tell the girls that they weren't in London, but they didn't listen. So I'm not going to blame them for that either. So I'm going to forgive.
Yeah, well, and they all got a decent trip, and they presumably were well behaved because they didn't want to go back on the Queen's special prison train. What do you think, Sister Bobby?
I am mostly with Rebecca. You do have to maintain discipline, and when you've got lots of young minds running around, then it's important.
Can't have any of that.
Yeah, no. Well, it's important, isn't it, to keep them in line to the fish. The only thing I would say, it's not our forgiveness she needs. She needs to go to the Queen.
Yes.
Because it's the Queen that's named in this, and she might have something to say.
In the absence of Her Majesty, we're the best that she can do.
I think she
would
say,
standing in for Her Majesty.
Okay, given the circumstances, I imagine that Mum might say, okay, you're forgiven.
What do you think?
You are forgiven.
What do you think, Mark?
I love the idea of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh sitting in Buckingham Palace behind a bank of CCTV
It might
cameras.
be true.
Just watching. It could well
It
be true.
might be true.
There may be no deception at all. You never know. But I do love that idea. But I think in the face of a bit of a smart aleck in this girl Amelia, I think it was the only option that Brownell had. So I agree with Rebecca and Bobby. I can forgive.
So now it's very welcome back to Part-Time Pauline, back into the Confessional Collective. We've missed your austere Presbyterian ways.
I can't wait to find out who I can judge today.
Well, it's Victoria who you can
I don't
judge
like her already.
Right. Dear Simon and the Collective, the recent Battle of Waterloo celebrations and a couple of last week's contributors reminded me of something I should seek forgiveness for. It's the mid-1990s and I was living in Muswell Hill in North London. I was in my early 20s and seeing a young man, Peter, also in his early 20s. I was an immigrant from Ireland. He was an internally displaced young man from Cornwall. He genuinely was one of life's good guys, but for a young man, there were occasions when he could do a very good impersonation of being 70 years old due to an overdeveloped appreciation of history. Matters were made very much worse by my downstairs neighbours, Roger and Liz, being members of the Sealed Knot Society, the Civil War reenactment community. Fine people, all of them, I'd just like to add. And so it came to pass that one weekend, after a lot of discussion, I had to go and play dressing up. I should point out that I'm 5'11". Peter was a few inches taller. I was really reluctant and refused to discuss my costume with anyone, saying it would be a surprise. We had a big old French estate car which was loaded up, and off we went. When we arrived, I opened the back of the car and erected beach screens to prepare. Peter, with an almost Amish desire for authenticity, went to find Roger and Liz. He returned for me about 15 minutes later, wearing doublet, breeches and 17th century boots, because they're about to fight the Battle of Naseby again. I, says Victoria, stepped from behind the screen and with head in place was a perfectly resplendent 7-foot-tall squirrel. Well, you can imagine Peter was livid. My belief was that if I had to play dressing up, I should go as something that I quite liked. Well, with the head on, it was almost impossible to hear what people were saying, so I had to stare at them intently in the mistaken belief that I could lip read, and I was swivelling my head and staring at everyone I suspected might be talking. When I lost track, I held my head to one side in what I hoped was an baby puppy look. I wasn't winning, but I had a plan. From years working in pubs, I had an ice bucket and used papier-mâché and poster paints that I'd fashioned to make a football-sized hazelnut to go with my squirrel outfit. I'd filled the inside of the ice bucket with chocolates. With the squirrel head off, I passed around the sweets and chatted away. I felt the squirrel costume was an appropriate choice, given how much land in England was forested in the past. There was hardly a battle in the Civil War that hadn't been witnessed by at least one squirrel. Interesting thinking, Victoria. More through luck than judgment, I was dressed as a red squirrel. Another point in my favour, I thought. Anyway, the time came to go mustering, and I, head in place, picked up a square halberd or whatever, which, as you know, is a two-handed pole weapon with an axe head, and I headed off to the battlefield, probably the only squirrel ever to wield such a device. Some sergeant major type took exception to having a squirrel in his ranks. Although I couldn't hear what he was saying, I was staring at him while he shouted at Peter that I would have to go and sit in the car. Confused, something that was never said during the Battle of Naseby. Confused, I held up my head in a ping, I've got an idea manner, pulled the lid off the hazelnut and offered him a sweet. Very unfairly, he grabbed the hazelnut and hurled it far down the field, as far as he could. I pulled the head off and confronted him. There are a million things that I would like to have said, but what I actually said was I didn't think it added to the authenticity of the battlefield to have it strewn with Cadbury's roses. I was no longer allowed to sit in the car and I had to leave altogether at this point, and since I had no driving licence, Peter was excused also. For long parts of the journey, I kept my squirrel head on. I should seek forgiveness from some of the country drivers because the car was left-handed, a left-hand drive, so they saw a monumental Citroën bearing down on them, apparently being driven by a surly giant squirrel. I don't seek forgiveness from the reenactors or historians. They take things far too seriously. Roger and Liz didn't speak to me for the 4 years I remained in that flat. I have to seek forgiveness, though, from Peter. I was an immigrant and they wanted a musketeer or pikeman, not a squirrel. I hope you can forgive me. Something Dom Jollyish about that one, Victoria, and I appreciate it very much. A very fine image of the Battle of Naseby being refought. Very serious battle, of course, but a squirrel. I'm not sure on which side the squirrel. I would think the squirrel would inherently be a cavalier, really, and not a roundhead. But anyway, what do I know? Let's see what Sister Pauline makes of that.
Actually, I think that's a hilariously funny thing to do. Unbelievable.
Oh, sorry, there you go. Carry on.
That's all I'm going to say.
Moving on, anyway. Now to me.
That's quite enough.
And then Mike.
I bet that was really, really funny for her. I bet it wasn't funny at all for every single other person
Well,
there.
you take it seriously. That's the point of doing a reenactment.
Unfortunately, they
You
do take it seriously because they do take it seriously.
Well, that's the point. There's no point in reenacting if you're not going to take it seriously.
So, well, I think that was an incredible act of individualism. Lots of admiration for it, and I bet it was really funny if you weren't one of the reenactors. It's a bit unforgivable to ruin everybody else's day.
Yeah, you could say, Nigel, that
And Peter's.
It was quite selfish because everyone is there. It's a very important thing. They've got their outfits. They take the doublet and breeches and the 17th century boots and the pikes and the muskets. And here's some smart Alec dressed as a squirrel.
She put a lot of work into it, though. I mean, her own ice bucket was full of roses. She'd obviously given it thought. She was trying to appease certain people, and I bet lots of people did take those edibles as well. So, and I think definitely a royalist because they were red squirrels, of which there are very few left any now. And I just think, they were royal lineage before the Greys came along and pushed them out. So just because she's completely bonkers, great Celtic. If she and Peter had bred a brace of Celts, it'd be very interesting, but it doesn't sound they ever did. I just hope she had a sunshine roof in the car so she could have got that 7-foot head through the roof.
I think she sounds a subversive influence, I think.
Forgiven.
What do you think, Mike?
Forgiven. Well, I do love that image of the squirrel in the midst of battle, but having grown up in Leicestershire, very close to Market Bosworth, which every year had an historical reenactment of the Battle of Bosworth, I, like Pauline, agree that these people do take their reenactments very seriously.
It could have been the Battle of Bosworth. It could have been.
Could well have been. Yeah. So I'm afraid, having been to several of them myself and knowing how serious they take them, sounds like it did rather spoil the day, so I can't forgive Victoria.
Well, they were this week's Confessions, and very good too. Some splendid images, and maybe it provoked a thought in your sinful breast. confessions@bbc.co.uk for the email, please. More in a week. And the Weekly Mayo available to download now and every Friday and cherish forever. Thank you.
Simon